This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Leaders of the world's two biggest economies, Chinese President Xi Jinping and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden, are preparing for another round of talks set to take place in a couple of hours. EU to widen Belarus sanctions as row intensifies. And Egypt begins clinical trials for locally produced vaccine. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers, and here with the very latest in business is Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in the next 30 minutes. Nigeria's headline inflation has slowed down to a 10-month low as food cost increases slow down. And real estate developers in Egypt are set to increase the price of housing units due to a rise in construction costs. We'll have the details on those stories and lots more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Hannah.
Thank you so much for that, Rama. Well, our top story for this news hour: leaders of the world's two biggest economies, Chinese President Xi Jinping and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden, are preparing for another round of talks. It's set to take place on Tuesday morning, Beijing time. It'll be their first one-on-one virtual meeting. Both have spoken over the phone twice since Biden took office this year. The leaders will discuss ways to work through thorny bilateral ties in recent months. The Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs says the event comes at the crossroads of bilateral relations.
We hope the U.S. and China will meet each other in halfway by enhancing dialogue and cooperation, effectively managing conflicts, and appropriately handling sensitive issues. We hope the two countries will explore ways of mutual respect and peaceful coexistence.
Well, for more on what to expect from these talks, joining me now is our correspondent, John Terrett, who is in New York. Hi, John. Good to see you. This is a highly anticipated meeting, John. How important is it?
Yes. Hey, Hannah, thanks for having me on. You know, it rather depends where you stand on the relationship between Washington, D.C. and Beijing, and in this country, as far as North America is concerned, where you stand politically. Because I've been watching all the broadcasts this morning. It's only just midday here in North America, in New York. I've been watching all the breakfast shows this morning and monitoring what they were saying. And the comments regarding this summit or meeting between President Xi and President Biden seem to range from optimistic to pointless. A lot of broadcasters have been pointing out that President Biden asked for this and President Xi has agreed to go ahead and do it, and they're suggesting that China will not make any concessions at all to anything that President Biden says, certainly not at this time, and that is in part because China sees itself as rising at this time, while it sees North America really as beginning to fade away and fall behind. Now, the White House itself has said that President Biden, when he speaks to President Xi, will make his priorities regarding the relationship between Washington and Beijing absolutely clear, and that he will be candid in what he says. And within the last hour or so, we've heard that they're talking about a common sense guardrail around Chinese policies. So that's a new line for you there. White House talking about putting common sense guardrails around Chinese policies that some it will like and some it will not like, of course. Now, as for Beijing, you just played the quote from the Ministry of Information there, a crucial crossroads. They're hoping to be met halfway, appropriate responses, effective management, all that sort of thing. Now, Politico, which is a website and a newspaper that follows political issues in Washington, D.C., and indeed around the country as well, but particularly in Washington, D.C., Politico has a headline up at the moment saying, "Don't call it a summit. Whatever you do, don't call it a summit." I think they did originally try to call it a summit because that lends an air of authority to what otherwise would just be basically a Zoom conference call. But they say don't call it a summit because nothing really is going to come out of this. But I think that after the era of Donald Trump and the relations that descended so low between Washington and Beijing. And because here in New York we have Chinese companies that have been delisted from the stock exchange, Americans can't invest in as many corporations now as they could when Donald Trump was in power, because Biden has extended the banned list, and because of the anti-China competition bill, which is actually stalled at the moment up on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., but is still there. And the people who are behind that bill think it will give America a real edge over China if it can be passed. And because of the Alaska meeting back in March, when the lower level people met and it basically descended into a raucous shouting match, because of all that, I think that the fact that they're meeting at all has to be a good thing. And think of it like this: the parents are in the room now. I think that's the way to think about it, because we've had plenty of people trying over the course of the last 10 months since Biden's been in office to improve relations between the two capitals. Well, now the two key people will be meeting. There's a Washington phrase that says no deliverables. It means nothing is likely to come out of the meeting. Well, that's fair enough, but there's still grounds for optimism, and it's a chance to reset. Hannah?
John, having said that, you've spoken about some of the expectations of this meeting from both sides. Can you tell us perhaps a little bit more about specific topics that you think might be discussed at this meeting?
Well, we think we know what President Biden and President Xi are going to raise. In Biden's case, I think top of the list is going to be Taiwan, because that really does rattle Americans. Whenever they talk about China these days, they talk about it. And I was watching an interview on television here only a few hours ago. They talk about it in such a way that China is about to invade Taiwan sometime later this week, which of course I think is absolutely nonsense. But that's the tone of the debate here. So he'll raise Taiwan. Of course, he has sent observers and trainers into the island, and all sides in the region have ramped up their military exercises in the region lately. I think he's going to mention the China hypersonic missile tests, and then it'll be things that you're very familiar with: Xinjiang, Hong Kong, and the South China Sea. Now, as for President Xi, well, my understanding is he's going to be looking at the issue of tariffs and the ongoing trade war, particularly seeking fair treatment for Chinese companies in North America, bearing in mind what I said just now about those Chinese telecoms companies delisted at the stock exchange and all those Chinese corporations that Americans cannot invest in anymore. And then over and above that, the AUKUS agreement involving the UK, Washington, and Australia that will see Australia get nuclear-powered submarines. China very worried about that because they're concerned they could be easily converted to be nuclear-armed submarines. And also the Quad alliance, which is the US, Japan, Australia, and India. I think there's some concern in Beijing about that particular alliance. But you know, the line is going to be from President Xi: we don't want to escalate the situation beyond where it is now, and we don't want a new Cold War either. And I think the feeling in Beijing is that a lot of the rhetoric here, some of which I've touched on in the last few minutes, is pushing towards some kind of Cold War, as there used to be between the old Soviet Union and the United States. And China will make it clear it does not want that. Finally, hopes for optimism start with climate change. They know they've got to work together. They did work together at the end of COP26 in Glasgow at the weekend, even though the issue about coal has upset a lot of people. But the point is, they did work together on that final agreement very closely, so they can do it, and that alone gives grounds for some optimism, I think. Hannah?
Thank you so much for all that, John. Always great speaking to you. John Terrett speaking to us from New York. Well, the upcoming virtual meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Joe Biden is preceded by months of high-level contact since the U.S. President took office in January. Our reporter Li Jinhua recaps the key moments.
Since Joe Biden was sworn in as the 46th U.S. President in January, the direction of China-U.S. relations has been closely watched. A key focus was whether Biden would continue the hostile stance towards China taken by his predecessor Donald Trump. In February, Presidents Xi Jinping and Biden talked over the phone. In their first phone call, they agreed to maintain close communication on the basis of mutual interest. It was a good start. Then came the first high-level face-to-face meeting in Alaska in March. In attendance were China's senior diplomat Yang Jiechi and Foreign Minister Wang Yi, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan led the U.S. delegation. This video went viral on Chinese social media. A heated exchange at the opening of the meeting, with each other rebuking the other's policies. The agenda covered human rights, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and climate change. And no joint statement was issued. In April, US senators introduced the Strategic Competition Act of 2021, aiming to counter China's increasing global influence.
The US is off balance currently, and it wants to externalize this insecurity to others, especially China, because it fears China is gaining strength as America declines.
In June, Yang Jiechi and Antony Blinken spoke again, but on the phone this time. Blinken brought up issues of Hong Kong, Xinjiang, Taiwan, as well as investigations into the origins of COVID-19. Again, some old tricks. Yang urged the US to stop interfering in China's internal affairs. Later, tensions continued to build up. More Chinese companies were added to the US blacklist, and the US Senate passed a bill to ban all products from Xinjiang over alleged forced labor. Then, in July, US Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman met with Wang Yi in the eastern Chinese city of Tianjin. Wang accused the US of trying to suppress China's development, while Sherman said the US was willing to have open and candid contact with China. In September, Xi and Biden talked on the phone for the second time, ending a nearly 7-month gap in direct communication between them. Relations seem to have looked up a bit since then. Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou was allowed to return to China in September after nearly 3 years of detention in Canada. In October, Yang Jiechi and Sullivan met again in Zurich. With little drama this time, they agreed to maintain high-level talks and improve communication. All these have paved the way for Xi and Biden's upcoming virtual meeting. Tensions will most likely remain, but at least the two sides are willing to talk.
We'll turn our attention now to the ongoing migrant crisis at the Poland-Belarus border. Hundreds of migrants have made their way to the Belarusian border fence. The Police Ministry of Defense is accusing Belarus of escorting migrants to the Kuznica border crossing, which remains closed on the Polish side. Polish security forces are now in tense standoff with migrants. The European Union has agreed to step up sanctions against Belarus. The new sanctions would target airlines and travel agencies involved in transporting migrants to the bloc's borders. Belarus has called the claims of it driving the migrant crisis absurd. We're now joined by CGTN's Lucy Hoff in Brussels, who is following up on those developments at the Belarusian-Polish border. Hi, Lucy. Thank you so much for joining us on Africa Live. Speak to us about what the latest is on that situation along the border right now.
Well, as you mentioned there, it is an intensifying standoff. We understand that there are thought to be as many as 4,000 people now at the border, at the EU's external border with Belarus, in Poland and Lithuania, and that the number of troops on the other side of that border, on the Polish side, are also increasing. We've seen some extraordinary pictures today of huddles of hundreds of people sitting on the ground, faced by those troops on either side of a fence. Now, we know that the situation is getting worse. The people on the ground there are living in freezing conditions. We know that the death toll currently stands at 10, with the body of one individual found by authorities over the weekend. That toll is sadly expected to increase, and there are many thought to be unaccounted for, particularly on the Belarus side. So a very, very dire situation for those people, we understand, largely who've been flown from the Middle East via Minsk to that border crossing, and clearly great humanitarian concern. We know that Iraq is one of the first countries to offer repatriation flights. It has said that it wants to repatriate 571 of its citizens who are known to be at the EU's external border and wish to return home, and will be running that flight on Thursday. So clearly authorities around the world are responding to this crisis.
Lucy, back in Brussels, the European Foreign Affairs ministers were to meet to discuss further sanctions on Belarus. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so we've just heard from the EU's chief diplomat, Josep Borrell, following this meeting with EU foreign affairs ministers, but also with NATO Secretary General as well, there has been agreement for this expanded package of sanctions to include those individuals and organisations believed to be facilitating the human trafficking of people from the Middle East to that border crossing. So the details of who specifically will be on that list, we're told, will be revealed in the coming days, but is likely to include around 30 officials working under Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, as well as airlines and travel agents such as the state-owned Belavia airline, the state-owned Belarusian airline, as well as other travel agents believed to be facilitating those journeys. So really the EU saying that the previous rounds of sanctions, some 4 rounds, have been effective. That is what has led to this escalating action from Belarus, and hopes that this will cool the tensions down on that border crossing as they continue to mount.
Thank you so much for all those details, Lucy. Lucy Hoff speaking to us from the EU's headquarters in Brussels. What's Mali now, where 4 soldiers have been killed and 14 others wounded by suspected jihadists. According to the military, the jihadists carried out the attack northeast of the capital Bamako, near the border with Mauritania. Mali has been struggling to contain an Islamist insurgency which first broke out in the north of the country back in 2012. Thousands of people have been killed and hundreds have fled their homes due to the insurgency. The violence has continued despite the deployment of international forces, including UN peacekeepers and French as well as African forces. Well, we're joined by Fahriman Rodriguez Kone, who's the senior researcher for the Sahel team at the Institute for Security Studies based in Bamako. Thank you so much, Mr. Kone, for joining us. Why are we seeing this increase in militant attacks in the region, especially Mali and Burkina Faso in particular?
Well, this increasing is showing a growing operational capacity of the violent extremist group in a context of political state crisis like the case in Mali. But this capacity, increasing capacity of the violence group are based on the strengthening of the community base and the increasing access to resources in the area they control. They're controlling roads and space and more resources like gold, fuel trafficking, armed trafficking. It's also a situation facilitated by a state response that's remained largely ineffective face to a multidimensional, resilient and constantly mobile jihadist insurgency. Jihadist groups are easily taking roots in the deficiencies of development, the absence of the state and the frustration due to injustice. But the state response is largely military driven.
So from people who are following this story, from what they can see, it seems as though regional and international strategies to fight terrorists are not working. What do you think needs to be done about it?
Well, I think more the approaches are designed on emergency and interventionist model, which try to address, I think, long and deep structural causes of the problem in the region. These problems are instrumentalized by the jihadist group state development questions, as I said. So the question is, how effective can be stabilization models faced to deep ill-governance problem? For the moment, instead of this, the response is driving solution which is underlined on military approach. The response should be a multidimensional one, not only focus on military. They must include also development solution. They must include the return of the state, but not a state which is which is committing injustice, a corrupted state, but a state which is effective for citizens, a state which have, how to say, a fair governance of resources. Is at this price that we could find a model which could be effective faced to this insurgency.
Mr. Kone, thank you so much for all that. Fahiraman Rodrigo Kone, senior researcher for the Sahel team at the Institute for Security Studies, and he's based in Bamako. Well, the 19th CPC Central Committee has concluded a 4-day plenary session in Beijing. The committee reviewed a work report and passed a resolution on the party's experiences and achievements. Many experts say the 6th plenum is a milestone and has set the tone for the new era for China. Stephen Ndegwa, a Nairobi-based communications expert, spoke with CGTN's Daniel Arab Moy.
Mr. Ndegwa, for the sake of those who might not know or understand, what is the significance of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China's plenary session?
So for China, this is now all the people who have been given top responsibilities across the board in China, meeting to review what has happened over the last year and looking maybe at the current situation and where they might need to go in the future. So once you get to know that this is the highest decision-making organ, then you realize how important it is and even why it gets global attention.
What do you mean when you talk of the country's march towards the Chinese dream?
So I think the Chinese dream is that equality of sorts where everyone is catered for and no one hungers amidst the national wealth in the country.
What lessons can African countries learn from the CPC plenary sessions?
So I think what the CPC shows us, or the CPC success in that case shows us, is that we can have our own homegrown mode of democracy. It's going to be a long journey. It has taken CPC 100 years to finally bring China into greatness. So I think for us, we also need to take time and study our cultures and so forth.
To what extent do decisions arrived at the CPC plenary session impact on Africa?
The socio-economic and political linkages between Africa and China are growing and they're becoming deeper. We are looking towards FOCAC, in Senegal at the end of this month. And so I think a lot of the issues that were discussed at the CPC, Congress, we are going to be canvassed also at the FOCAC. And for Africa, we are looking at investments right now. How much investments can we still get from China?
Would you advocate for African countries to embrace China's political model?
There's a lot to borrow from, definitely from the Chinese system, and it is the whole cultural aspect of it which works.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Ndegwa. It was good having you with us.
Well, it's time now for us to take a short break and return more on Africa Live, including Egypt begins clinical trials for locally produced COVID vaccine. And starting today, we'll bring you a new series looking at Africa's urbanization growth.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo, Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. You're watching News Making Headlines right here on Africa Live. We go to Egypt now, which has announced that its first developed COVID-19 vaccine is to enter the human clinical trials phase. Experts say that if the new vaccine passes all the 3 phases of trials, it could be released for emergency use within 9 months. Here's CGTN's Adel Amrouhi with more.
It was a proud day for Egypt. The Minister of Higher Education and Scientific Research, Khaled Abdel Ghaffar, announced that the first locally developed COVID-19 vaccine is now entering its final phase of testing. Covivax sought the Egyptian drug authorities' approval to commence human clinical trials.
Egypt has never had experience in creating vaccines or even worked on human-related vaccines. We have many successes in veterinary vaccines, but not for humans. When the Egyptian president gave us the directive to work on a COVID-19 vaccine, he showed confidence in our Egyptian scientists and promised to support our attempts by all means.
The new vaccine must pass through 3 different phases of human trials before getting approval for emergency use. It will be first tested on a limited number of people, from 300 up to 800, to prove its safety.
Once we prove that these vaccines are safe in a small number of healthy volunteers, we can move into phase 2, which includes a higher number. You are trying to prove whether it's effective or non-effective. Once you've proven that it is effective and it did not produce any side effects in people that do have other complications, once you've proven this, then you get the release and it's available. So each phase normally takes between 2 to 3 months.
That should make Egypt's first developed human vaccine available before September next year.
The first advantage is that you don't wait for the other countries to supply you or to give you their production of vaccines or not. The second is you now have the know-how of how to produce a vaccine. The vaccine war has started and it won't disappear in the foreseeable future. So we have to have the ability to produce our own vaccine that is isolated, cultured from the vaccine, from the virus that is available in our country.
The government began research to produce COVID-19 vaccines in March 2020. Besides Covivax, the Minister of Scientific Research says another COVID-19 vaccine will enter human trials within the next few days.
Egypt has already begun manufacturing COVID-19 vaccines domestically in collaboration with the Chinese pharmaceutical Sinovac. The country is no longer challenged to cover its domestic needs. Developing Egyptian vaccines, however, is a great milestone for scientific research in the region that will help feed the demand in the Middle East and Africa. Adel Mahwi, CGTN, Cairo.
Well, reports indicate that South Africa is finally beginning to make some progress in its move to generate more renewable energy. Sadly, however, experts and analysts say that this is coming too late to address the country's power crisis. State power utility Eskom is still struggling to provide stable electricity supply. New renewable energy solutions will feed additional power to the grid, but it will be years before the extra energy can plug the gap. Sumitra Naidu reports.
South Africa's renewable energy procurement program was put in place 10 years ago, but failed to materialize. Independent power producers and Eskom couldn't agree on the terms and conditions. Pricing was the biggest issue.
So the way the program works in South Africa is that Eskom is the buyer of the electricity as designated by the minister. So Eskom will sign a power purchase agreement with the wind and solar farm companies. And once those projects are finished with construction, it will deliver the energy to Eskom and Eskom will pay for that energy.
The procurement program was stopped in 2015 when Eskom failed to sign purchase agreements.
I think the most difficult part for us as an industry was during around 4 delays or 3 years, where there was political challenge and intervention in terms of progressing the renewable energy sector.
Government has recommitted to the process. Bid window 5, the latest round of auctions, has just closed. 25 companies were successful in their bids to build plants and generate renewable energy.
The fact that they were able to attract funding means that they've gone through a rigorous process by the lenders of a due diligence and testing them. Secondly, is that most of them are international players with a track record and well-tested projects that are operational worldwide. So they've got the capacity.
The new companies will sell to Eskom at under $0.01 per kilowatt. It's cheap, but according to experts, still feasible.
We're already producing electricity to the South African grids. We've secured 850 megawatts of wind and solar plants in the previous rounds 1, round 3 and round 4. We've got a 9,000 megawatt pipeline in South Africa of assets in various stages of development. This 1.27 gigawatt that we've won in round 5 is part of that pipeline.
The 25 preferred bidder projects are expected to bring around $4 billion in private sector investment to the South African economy and create over 13,000 jobs.
If South Africa is going to be dependent on these IPPs and South Africa is going to be dependent on renewable, that the program needs to be led by South African indigenous South African people, especially people of color, women, African people who are previously disadvantaged.
South Africa is suffering the consequences of delaying its renewable energy plan. Ongoing load shedding is hampering efforts by business and industry to ramp up after COVID. While some older projects are online, it will take 2 to 3 years before the new projects are complete. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, on to our special series now. African cities are experiencing rapid urbanization and growth. According to the UN's projection, the continent will have the fastest global urban growth, with over half of its population living in urban areas by the year 2050. CGTN's Daniel Arab Moore reports.
Now, Africa is reportedly the fastest urbanizing continent in the world. According to the World Bank's projection, the continent will be home to more than 2.5 billion people by 2050. Now, 55% of the projected population growth will be people living in urban centers. According to the Democratic Republic of Congo's National Institute of Statistics, the country's capital, Kinshasa, has approximately 12 million people. Now, the city's population is projected to grow to a staggering 21 million people by 2030. Now, Lagos has approximately 14 million people. The city is the main contributor to the Nigerian economy. Now, the city's population is expected to hit 20 million by 2030. The UN's World Urbanization Prospect 2021 estimates that approximately 21 million people are living in Cairo. Now, this number is projected to grow to 25 million by 2030. Now, although smaller in population, other African cities rising into mega cities include Nairobi, Addis Ababa, Dar es Salaam, Cape Town, and Johannesburg. Now, according to the World Bank, rural-urban migration into cities remain the major cause of rapid urbanization in Africa. Now, this has largely translated into rising slum establishments, increasing poverty and inequality. Now, the continent is now pushing for speedy implementation of ICT initiatives for transformation. Now, with the use of Chinese technology, for example, many African countries are developing smart parking projects. Now, experts say the adoption of smart cities will help to improve the quality of life of Africa's city dwellers. Back to you.
Well, on that note, let's take a look at what's happening in the world of business with Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in business news. Nigeria's inflation has slowed down to a 10-month low as food costs increases abate. And real estate developers in Egypt are set to increase the price of houses in order to cope with rising construction costs.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome Welcome back. Let's start in Nigeria. Headline inflation over there slowed down to a 10-month low in October, giving the central bank a bit of room to leave interest rates essentially on hold, unchanged, next week. Consumer prices increased by just under 16% compared to a year earlier, compared to 16.63% in September, according to the Statistics Agency in a report released earlier today. Now, while inflation has exceeded the 9% ceiling of the central bank's target band for more than 6 years now, the sustained slowdown in inflation may give the Monetary Policy Committee room to hold rates and aid the economy's rebound from last year's pandemic-induced contraction. Economic output in Africa's largest oil producer has lagged well behind the pace of population expansion of roughly 2.6% every year since crude prices fell back in 2015. Madagascar is the world's biggest producer of vanilla. Its economic output is forecast to rise by 5.4% next year as the pandemic eases, borders are reopened, and public investments and confidence improves. According to a local media report, this year's growth estimate has been cut to 3.5% from an earlier forecast of 4.3% due to a second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic that hit the Indian Ocean island nation in the second quarter. The budget deficit is also seen to be narrowing to around 6.1% of GDP next year from 6.6% this year. Inflation is forecast at 7% compared to 6.4% in 2021. Up north, the number of arrivals at the Tunisian borders in the first 10 months of 2021, at least as far as tourists are concerned, has exceeded 1.9 million persons, up 7.2% compared to the same period last year. Now, the surge is attributed to a 40% increase in entries of Tunisians residing abroad to more than 700,000 persons, and by 30% in the number of European tourists arrivals to roughly 506,000 people. The country's tourism ministry is adding that the number of overnight stays has also gone up by nearly 20%, from 5.1 million overnight stays to nearly 6.1 million during the period ending in October this year. The tourism sector as a whole posted a 6.1% increase in revenue to over $670 million over the first 10 months of 2021. Now, the impact of global inflation caused by rising energy prices and supply chain bottlenecks, that's now starting to feed into the real estate sector in Egypt. Developers over there have decided to increase prices of houses starting in December due to rising construction costs. Here's Yasser Kim with that story.
The real estate sector is set for a new hit, though it's still recovering from the economic fallout of the coronavirus pandemic. This time it's caused by the ongoing inflationary trend in global energy prices.
This issue will usually reflect on the price of building materials in Egypt, which will raise the cost of construction, and therefore the price of units in Egypt are expected to rise by up to 15% from now towards the first quarter of 2022.
Some developers might even raise the price of units already sold, but not delivered yet. Price hikes would eventually pull sales down, leading to a recession in the real estate sector. Aware of the repercussions, most developers are looking for ways to keep the market afloat.
The price is increasing by 15%, but when you go to buy, you'll be offered discounts and payment facilities. We have to restructure the payment plan by increasing the number of installments and number of years for clients, but to a limit to avoid a collapse for the developer.
The state has been continually supporting the construction sector through different crises. During the pandemic, it pumped billions of dollars of emergency funds for developers and to restructure debt for stricken companies. Recently, banks were allowed to provide house loans as long as 15 years repayment at only 3% interest rates, which encouraged many to buy new houses. It's a reflection of the importance of the sector to the economy.
It accounts for 16% of GDP, and the real estate sector also generates other feeding industries like building material factories, cement for example, and it employs millions of workers in all projects, especially with mega construction projects taking place around the country.
In spite of the ongoing recession, some developers play down its huge effects, expecting a quick rebound after the global energy crisis recedes.
The demand will become consistent on the long term. The main reason is the fast-growing population. We are nearly 105 million people, while in 2010 we were just 75 million people. The deficit in supply of housing units is about 1 million per year. But to resist the local recession, you have to export your product. Whatever the increase in price here, the low value of the Egyptian pound since its devaluation makes houses very cheap for foreigners. And therefore, we should target more foreigners, especially the Arab clients.
Tens of companies have also signed up for huge reconstruction projects in Gaza, Libya, and Iraq. The big demand for Egyptian companies abroad makes up for any losses in the local market. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
The billionaire mining magnate Patrice Motsepe's African Rainbow Energy and Power continues its expansion into South Africa's renewable energy sector. This is after the consortium was won just under half of the projects awarded in the country's latest push for better green energy. Here's Angela Coppola with the details.
The business recently announced a deal with Absa Bank to take over the bank's renewable energy portfolio, creating one of the biggest independent renewable energy groups in the country, valued at close to $450 million and 31 renewable assets.
We must be clear, eventually energy companies is one that you must build scale. You must build scale to really make a difference, and being able to make a difference in terms of growth, provide opportunities for investors, and hence, like you said, the deal with Absa.
Damas said that the debate around the importance of consistent power supply is looking at the power provision market in the wrong way.
What is the structure of the economy you need? Once you understand that, then a combination of technologies that can run 24/7, technologies that can run for 30% of the day, solar does it for 20% of the day, or 16, wind does it for 40% of the day. And you need to bring all of that together and make sure that you have a stable grid. And once you have a stable grid, that also needs a significant amount of investment in technology to make sure this intermittency that is now exponentially increased can be managed.
The company has continental growth aspirations, but they aren't in a rush.
We have the Continental Free Trade Agreement. We have to be greatly interconnected. We have countries close to us that's got energy sources that we don't have abundance of. And the question is, how do you knit all of that together? And certainly we do think that the private sector should play a role, and within that we should. But on the basis of building a very strong business in South Africa.
This business has shown that it's important that you choose the right partners and also the right projects. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
And finally, in Beijing, a newly established stock market has made its debut today. The Beijing stock market is said to be a major platform for SMEs. 81 companies are in the first batch of trading. 10 of them, in fact, are making their debut. The rest had to be transferred over from China's new third board. More than 2.1 million new investors applied for trading. The total number of investors is estimated to eventually reach over 4 million. Roughly 112 securities firms have been granted memberships in this new bourse. It's the third stock market on the Chinese mainland, after the ones, of course, in Shanghai and Shenzhen. Yang Qingxi explains its significance for companies and investors alike.
Behind me is the Beijing Stock Exchange. Why does the city need this when it already has an exchange house called the National Equities Exchange and Quotations, or the NEEQ, supporting innovative startups? Well, first of all, the NEEQ has its own challenges. Investment activities there have waned in the past several years, and this lack of liquidity has forced some companies to withdraw.
Over the past 6 years, the number of firms listed on the NEEQ have dropped from about 10,000 to 7,000.
So the Beijing Stock Exchange is a major effort to reinvigorate Beijing's support of small and mid-sized companies.
It offers registration-based listing and a shorter IPO process than its domestic counterparts. China's experimentation with registration-based listing started in 2019 with the launch of the Star Market in Shanghai, which was also geared towards high-tech companies.
Close to 300 companies have been listed on the Star Market in the past 2 years, and they encompass most of China's bigger tech firms. But mid-sized companies who aren't yet qualified still have a hard time.
This is where the Beijing Stock Exchange comes in, with an even shorter listing process than the Star Market. Analysts say this is good news for investors as well, because many early-stage startups have huge growth potentials, and that means potentially big returns.
In the past, because of strict requirements, companies that were qualified to list might have already grown by 10 times or even 100 times before being qualified for their IPOs. So stock investors weren't able to cash in on their early growth. Now with the Beijing Stock Exchange, stock investors can invest in small companies.
Individual investors need about $77,000 of assets in their stock accounts to be qualified to invest in a new exchange. But those who don't meet this requirement can choose from 8 mutual funds that are launching financial products targeted at the BSE, the new addition to China's capital market. Yang Chengxi, CGTN, Beijing.
We'll leave it there for the time being, but I'll be back at the top of the hour. In global business, we've been here to Ghana. Ghana's finance minister is expected to present the 2022 budget statement in Parliament today. Well, at least he was. That's been pushed forward to the 17th. But ahead of that release, there's been concern about Ghana's rising debt levels. It's soared to actually more than 3/4 of its GDP equivalent. It's threatening to derail growth in the West African oil, gold and cocoa producer. So what exactly should we expect in the budget later this week? We'll find out live from Accra at the top of the hour. See you then. For now, back to Hannah.
Thank you so much for that, Rama. Let's now take a short break and return more on Africa Live, including how a book fair in South Africa is promoting cultural exchange on the continent through storytelling.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
The first Africa Book and Design Festival has been launched in Johannesburg, South Africa. The festival celebrates African excellence in literature and design. It aims to encourage intra-African cultural exchange by connecting African authors and book designers under one roof. It also connects their work to Africa's growing consumer market. CGTN's Julissa Jamela tells us more.
Storytelling is part of African culture. It's often used to pass down knowledge, culture and tradition from generation to generation in order to shape societal narratives. This first Africa Book and Design Festival is about storytelling. It's also about books and design. The organizers believe that books and design are key resources to documenting and informing African culture.
The idea is to keep literature alive on the African continent. The second reason was we really were losing conversations about Black consciousness, conversations about identity, particularly, I'll say again, amongst our young people. Our young people are constantly flooded with content from other countries and communities and sectors, and we were not engaging actively enough in being part of the narrative that talks to our young people.
A number of authors from the African continent are here. Mandla Langa is one of South Africa's most highly regarded literary authors. His latest offering, The Lost Language of the Soul, is the story of the coming of age of a 14-year-old.
It's a story of a 14-year-old Zambian, half South African boy who grows up in Lusaka, and then his mother and father disappear. And so he joins a band of ANC guerrillas who are going down south, infiltrating into South Africa. He crosses the Zambezi with them and is in Botswana, and finally he makes his way into Southern Africa. It's a quest novel. It's an attempt at debunking the myths of xenophobia that are prevalent in South Africa at the moment. And it's my small contribution also to the people of Zambia.
The festival has been embraced by South Africa's Department of Sports, Arts and Culture.
2021 is really, according to the African Union, the Africa year, the year in which arts and culture are considered to be levers for economic development. And it's important for us to support events that really have that at the heart of their mission.
The festival theme is connecting the past, present, and future of African storytelling. Yudison Jamila for CGTN in Pretoria, South Africa.
It's sport news coming up after the show break, including in sport, heartbreak for South Africa as Ghana beat Bafana to clinch playoff spot for Qatar 2022.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
They begin on the football field, and Ghana beat South Africa by a 0-0 in a Group G decider on Sunday night to secure a spot in the final round of qualifiers for the 2022 FIFA World Cup. Andre Ayeo's first half goal from a spot kick at a packed stadium in Ghana's Cape Coast City was enough to send the Black Stars one step closer to Qatar. Here's CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rafai with a reaction from Accra.
Ghana's win on Sunday put the team ahead in Group G with more goals, while they finished level on 13 points with South Africa. The team beat South Africa by a lone goal, which was scored through a penalty. Ghanaian football fans hope the team can proceed to the World Cup after their playoff matches next year.
I'm happy Ghana has qualified to the playoffs in the competition. The team has to work hard to make it to the World Cup in Qatar next year.
I wish the team all the best in the qualifying playoffs. Ghana has got to go to Qatar for the World Cup.
Still, Ghana's win against South Africa is being contested. The South African Football Association says it will file a complaint over the conduct of the officiating referee to FIFA and CAF. Some football analysts say even though Ghana has made it to the playoff qualifier stage, their World Cup campaign has been unimpressive.
There's still a lot of work that the team will have to do, especially if you look at the teams who have already qualified and the teams that will be meeting in the next round. Those teams are teams who are very, very good. They have very good players, very quality players, and had their qualifiers quite comfortably. So if the Black Stars will really need to qualify, want to qualify for the World Cup, they really need to beef up their squad and improve their performances.
Ghana joins Mali, Senegal, Morocco, Egypt and DR Congo to the playoff stage of the Qatar 2022 World Cup qualifiers. 10 African teams will compete in the qualifying playoff next year. 5 teams will then make it to the World Cup, and Ghana hopes to be part of the countries punching their tickets to the global showpiece. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Well, while there was celebration in Ghana, it was devastation in South Africa as football fans were left heartbroken and enraged following Ghana's controversial penalty that proved to be decisive, sending the Black Stars to the final round of the FIFA 2022 World Cup qualifiers. CGTN CS Duplessis reports from Johannesburg.
The South African Football Association is said to be incensed with the 1-0 result and have expressed that they will be lodging a formal complaint with FIFA. Where that leaves Bafana's qualifying quest remains to be seen, with the chances of a successful appeal slim to none. But for now, it's a bitter pill to swallow for the Belgian tactician, who feels the officiating from the Senegalese referee left a lot to be desired.
You know, you look at the decisions and you think, it's a bit dodgy, especially in light of what happened with us in Senegal a few years ago. So I think it's our right to do that, especially considering the high stakes and a place at the World Cup up for grabs. But all in all, I think we've done really well. Surpassed expectations, with a very young team, and all bodes well for the future.
South Africa's national senior men's coach was given very little chance of success when he was appointed back in May of this year. But the 69-year-old has silenced his critics, and the results on the field have shown.
Looking back, we obviously had the Vision 2022, and we almost, surprisingly, almost made that vision a reality with a very young team. But I think there's a lot to build on. All we need to do now is keep these players in the system, keep bringing young players in, and make sure that these players that are now young players become the experienced players we build our team around in the future.
The absence of VAR remains a concern for the Bafana coach, who, despite not getting the job done in Ghana, believes that the future is bright. He will have some time on his hands to contemplate his next challenge, qualifying for the next edition of the Africa Cup of Nations, but he will be excited to get back to work as soon as possible, after taking a lot of positives from the FIFA World Cup qualifying campaign. CS du Plessis, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Meanwhile, in Qatar, organizers of the event held a flag-raising ceremony on Monday after a number of teams around the globe confirmed their qualification for the 2022 World Cup in the last few days. World champions of France, as well as Belgium, Denmark, Germany, Brazil, have gained their place at the tournament, while Croatia, Spain and Serbia also joined the list after winning their last group qualifying matches on Sunday. Ambassadors from some of the qualified teams raised the flag of their countries in a ceremony by the harbor in Doha. The tournament begins in a little over a year's time and will be the first World Cup to take place outside its traditional early European summer window.
We've begun the festival of raising flags today to welcome the countries that have qualified for the 2022 World Cup here in Qatar. We have the German team, the Brazilian team, the French team, and God willing, more teams will come soon. People of Qatar are eager to welcome these teams next year, and everyone will enjoy a great football celebration a year from now.
World football governing body FIFA has once again waded into the ongoing saga involving the Football Kenya Federation. It has asked Kenya's sports ministry to rethink its decision to form a caretaker committee to run the country's football body. In a letter addressed to the ministry by Secretary General Fatma Samura, FIFA has once again said they're ready for a roundtable discussion to solve the impasse, saying that the move by the government amounts to third-party interference. Samura warned that FIFA would not hesitate to ban FKF and, by extension, Kenya, if the move by the Kenyan government is not reversed. FKF President Nick Mwendwa was arrested on Friday, a day after the sports ministry announced that a caretaker committee would run the federation for 6 months while authorities investigate allegations of financial irregularities during his tenure.